In December 1952, one of the deadliest peacetime tragedies in history struck London. Over 4 days, a stinking yellow smog smothered the city so dense people couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. The capital ground to a halt. But far worse, the smog was loaded with poisonous gases, and there would be devastating consequences.
I'm Dr. Zand van Tulleken, and over 2 programs we'll be telling the story of how this catastrophe unfolded moment by moment, taking the capital by surprise and leaving tragedy in its wake.
The city fell silent. Thousands became sick. Hospitals were at breaking point, and the government attempted to hide their failings. And now, for the first time on television, we'll reveal the full extent of this 4-day deadly emergency.
At the time, the official death toll was 4,000. But, as we discover, the real figure was much, much greater.
Last time, we traced the first 2 days of the smog and discovered it was created by a combination of freak weather and the burning of low-quality coal. This time, Raksha Dave explores how the smog became so deadly.
Thinking about the insides of my throat and lungs if I was exposed to that, I mean, that's pretty shocking, isn't it?
We discover how it began to affect increasing numbers of people.
My father was getting more and more delirious. My mother was frantic.
Reveal the moment London finally breathed again.
Within a few hours, the smog just disappears. Must have been sweet relief for those people.
It was gorgeous. We took off our masks and said, well, that's that.
And uncover the shocking, true scale of the disaster.
These are lives cut short by decades because of the smog. This is the story of the great killer smog.
On Sunday, the 7th of December 1952, London woke to its 3rd day of thick, choking smog. It was damp, bitterly cold, and there wasn't a breath of wind. Instead of dispersing, the coal smoke pumping out of chimneys filled the streets, trapped in by an unusual high-pressure weather system.
That morning, Londoners were already beginning to suspect that this smog was different to other pea supers they'd known. It was thicker, dirtier, more noxious. But no one was yet aware of the scale of the human catastrophe that was unfolding all around them.
Almost 400 people, overwhelmingly elderly or sick, had already been killed prematurely by the smog. And it continued to remorselessly smother the city with no end in sight.
It didn't lift, and we were used to it lifting. There was a lot of swearing. Well, you can imagine, it had gone on too long.
It was increasing intensity, the nasty, unpleasant smell was increasing, and there was a definite yellow hue.
Everything was black and it was quiet. You couldn't hear anybody and you couldn't hear any traffic. This was the odd thing. It was as though everybody had died.
The smog had brought London to an almost complete standstill. No boats moved on the Thames, the airports were closed, roads were lined with cars abandoned by their drivers because they couldn't see where they were going.
Most people didn't risk venturing out that Sunday, even for church. But for key workers like ambulance drivers, there was no option. The service was now so overwhelmed, urgent appeals had gone out on the BBC for off-duty and retired drivers to return to work. All who could had now come in. To discover what they faced that morning, I'm meeting former driver Mark Bailey in his restored 1950s ambulance.
right there.
Oh, this is amazing. What was it like driving in the smog?
Pretty horrible. What I always used to do was to keep close to the white line in the middle of the road, but every so often the white line would give out and then you could find yourself drifting all over the place.
Really no idea where you were on the road?
Very often, no. But of course you're only moving along at about 2-3 miles an hour maximum.
And that's very stressful if you're trying to get to somebody who's unwell.
Or quite.
By Sunday, the smog was so thick, 2 drivers had to go out in each ambulance, so one could walk in front to guide. The average call-out time increased from the normal 30 minutes to well over 2 hours.
Well, let's have a look in the back. Oh, wow. So quite different from a modern ambulance.
Oh, yes. Plenty of space, but not much equipment.
So your job back in the day, you were a driver and an attendant
Yes.
as well. You did both roles.
Indeed, yes.
When you're dealing with a patient who's got respiratory distress, that is also quite distressing.
Indeed, there was not an awful lot you could do. You talk to them and try and calm them down and so on and say, well, we won't be too long, we're not got far to go, and just sort of keep them happy and cheerful.
Did the smog affect you?
But you have difficulty breathing at times. You put your life on line to the patient.
On that Sunday, you've got an ambulance service under tremendous pressure with short staffing, bed shortages, patients who are extremely ill, impossibly difficult conditions to drive in. It must have been very difficult for the crews.
It was, but it was just, as in wartime, you had no option. You just had to carry on. You couldn't give up.
The ambulances were under so much pressure, even police vans had to be used.
During the smog, we had this lady who was pregnant. She was in labour and most anxious to get to the hospital as quickly as possible. But it was first and second gear at the most. Very, very slow. The journey took us hours. It was a rough old ride. We were quite concerned in case she had the baby before we got there, which would have meant us stopping the van and obviously helping her to deliver. Wasn't looking forward to that at all, but fortunately wasn't necessary. Eventually we got her there safe and sound just in time. But I never did find out whether she had a boy or a girl. We're talking 70 years ago, aren't we? So yes, that baby would be 70 now.
As the smog refused to loosen its grip, even more Londoners became potential victims. Sick and healthy, old and young, would now become vulnerable to the killer smog.
These are lives cut short by decades because of the smog.
As the sun set on the 3rd day of the Great Smog, huge numbers of people suffering breathing difficulties were streaming into the capital's hospitals. There was something unique about Britain that made the smog even more dangerous. Levels of pollution in cities and rates of smoking were so high, the country was already in the grip of a lung disease epidemic. In 1952, deaths from bronchitis were up to 18 times greater than in some European countries. It was even known as the English disease. So when the smog fell, London was already vulnerable.
Londoners' lungs were already damaged and weakened, and now thousands of them would soon be pushed over the edge.
And they began to overwhelm the NHS. Wards became full, so hundreds of dangerously ill patients had to be transferred to other hospitals. And for 1 in 5, there wasn't a bed available anywhere in London. They had to wait and packed corridors hoping that one would become available. And this wasn't the only threat Londoners faced from the smog. Cars had already been abandoned. Shipping was at a standstill. By the end of the weekend, trains were still running, but journeys had become treacherous.
I was a signalman at Wembley Hill Station. The Great Smog in 1952 was my first experience of working in a fog. It was strenuous and an anxious time. How am I going to see the trains? It's almost impossible to see the trains. And also, would I hear them? My uppermost thought was what had happened just 2 months previously at the devastation at Harrow and Wealdstone.
London was still reeling from the Harrow and Wealdstone disaster. 112 people were killed when 3 trains collided after missing signals in fog.
My goodness me, I didn't want to have a mishap of that magnitude. I remember on one occasion I completely missed a train and I had to ring my colleague at the next signal box to ask him to stop the train.
Although transport was at a near standstill, the Queen and Prince Philip had managed to make it out of London. They were in Kent, thought to be visiting their friend, Countess Mountbatten. Prime Minister Churchill had also made it to his official country retreat, Chequers. But most Londoners were stuck in an ever-worsening crisis. At the pollution monitoring station at County Hall, readings showed coal smoke had now increased to 10 times above normal, and the levels of the noxious gas, sulfur dioxide, were now 12 times higher.
While the smoke and soot that stuck to the hair and the skin and caught in the throats of Londoners was extremely unpleasant, it was actually this extraordinarily high level of the gas sulfur dioxide that was the most toxic.
To find out why sulfur dioxide levels were so high and discover what made it so dangerous.
Hello.
Hello. I'm back to see pyrotechnics expert Mike Sansom.
Right, well, coal in 1952 had loads of impurities, and specifically this one, sulfur. It was up to 5% sulfur. When you burn this, it mixes with the oxygen in the atmosphere and it creates sulfur dioxide.
Mike's going to recreate what was happening in millions of fireplaces across London when Britain's sulphurous coal was burned.
Right, so that's all our sulphur in there. We're going to light it up. There it goes. That's the sulphur dioxide gas. I don't think we should be in here. Let's head on out.
Oh, good, okay.
Whoa. It's pretty awful, isn't it?
Yeah, you can smell that already.
Yeah, it hits you right in the back of the throat.
In 1952, huge quantities of sulfur dioxide was being pumped into London's air from coal fires burning across the capital. The gas then reacted with the water vapour in the smog, which we're also going to recreate.
So I'm going to replicate the smog in this polytunnel by creating a really fine mist.
Oh, yes. As the sulfur dioxide reacts with the fog, it creates acid, which will turn this green liquid red.
And you can actually see it. Look, it's changing colour already. So that's sulfuric acid.
Sulfuric acid? I can't imagine that's very good for your lungs.
No, not at all.
This is exactly what happened during the Great Smog. The sulfur dioxide from burning coal reacted with the fog and turned into an estimated 800 tons of sulfuric acid. People were breathing the acidic smog for days. Mike is going to use some pork belly to show me how nasty this acid is.
This is really concentrate sulfuric acid. This is as concentrated as you can get it. It's ripping apart all the moisture from inside the meat, and it's essentially burning it.
This is an accelerated version of what would have been happening to people's throats and lungs. this burning on contact. From that to that in 15 minutes. I mean, that's pretty shocking, isn't it?
Really nasty.
Thinking about the insides of my throat and lungs if I was exposed to that for days, I don't even want to think about it. I'm horrified, actually.
For 3 days, the toxicity levels of the smog had been climbing ever higher, and the impact was being felt across the capital. Londoners were developing a fierce, burning pain in their throats and lungs as they became inflamed by the sulfuric acid. Breathing became a struggle. For those unable to get enough oxygen, their faces would grow pale and their lips turn blue. They began to feel drowsy and needed to lie down. As their lung function deteriorated, they'd panic, hyperventilate, and then start to hallucinate. Finally, victims would fall unconscious. Death would soon follow.
The Great Smog wasn't just more polluted than any in living memory. It also was exceptional because it lasted so long. After 3 terrible days of breathing it in, were the sick and elderly the only ones overwhelmed?
I've come to the Barts Hospital Trust, where archivist Kate Jarman has records that reveal what types of people began to die in the Great Smog.
So what we've got here is a report published by the Ministry of Health, and it's entitled Mortality and Morbidity During the London Fog of December 1952.
And mortality and morbidity reports are, we use them now. You're looking at the deaths, but also the amount of sickness that has been caused as a result of the event.
Exactly. This is a graphic showing the distribution of pollution by sulfur dioxide during the days of the smog. And you've also got the ratios of deaths from the week of the smog with the prior week. And you can see there are areas of London, particularly Paddington and Camberwell, where it's 5 times the death rate of the previous week.
Wow. I mean, that's extraordinary. In Holborn, it's gone up 7 times. Am I reading that right?
Yeah.
Wow. How well does the concentration of the smog match up with the death rates?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that you've got high levels of sulfur dioxide throughout a lot of the boroughs in inner London, but it seems to be the ones with the lower socioeconomic conditions where there is a bigger impact on the death rate.
Everyone's breathing the same air, but not everyone's affected equally.
Absolutely.
The report also reveals the ages of people being killed by the smog.
There's a big jump, as we might expect, in deaths in the 65 to 74 age band. You've got 254 deaths registered the week before the smog, 717 the week of the smog.
That's a massive increase.
Yeah. But
wow.
What's really interesting, I think, there's an increase of over 50% in the 15 to 44 age group. Under 4 weeks, so really, really tiny babies, there's a significant jump in death rate.
So it's almost doubled in babies under 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Every single age group is affected in terms of deaths by the smog. All those are deaths that shouldn't have occurred.
Yeah, that's right. They're real people.
Seven-year-old Margaret Higgins was one of those children who were falling seriously ill by day 3 of the smog.
The smog caused me to develop pneumonia. I had a fierce temperature. I was usually put by the window. There was nothing to see because it was completely blocked out by the fog. So my whole world was in that room. My mum was worried because she didn't think I was ever going to get over it.
On the evening of the 3rd day, the smog was at its very worst. It was so vile to breathe, people tried to protect themselves by covering their mouths with scarves and handkerchiefs.
My grandmother insisted that we wore a white man's handkerchief across our faces and then a huge woolly scarf over the top of that. And you put all this paraphernalia on and you went out into the dark because you couldn't see a damn thing. When we took it off at the end of our stint, the white handkerchief was black and sulphur yellow all over, stained like you wouldn't believe.
Purpose-made smog masks also appeared on the streets. I've come to investigate what they were at the Wellcome Archives. Librarian Daniel Rees has a present for me, a package from his unique collection.
Ooh, this is all exciting. Wow.
There we go, an original Martindale mask from the 1950s. Looks rather uncomfortable, but actually it's very light and it's quite malleable, it's quite pliable. So the idea is that you would mould it around your face.
Were the government giving out face masks to normal people like me and you?
No, they were issued to only key workers, so policemen chiefly, to keep the really essential things going.
The Martindale was designed as an industrial dust mask and was now being repurposed to be issued to government workers during smogs. The general public were left to their own devices.
So doctors were advising you to make your own smog masks for 6.5
Make it and wear it. That is the advice given yesterday by the London Medical Council representing 6,000 doctors. The doctors are saying you must cover up because that will save lives.
By Sunday evening, there were reports of people being overcome and collapsing in the street. Some lay undiscovered for hours, as people passing only a metre away couldn't see them in the gloom. On that Sunday, there were 600 smog-related deaths, double the previous days. The daily death rate was now higher than during London's cholera epidemic of 1866. In 3 days, the Great Smog had killed nearly 1,000 people of all ages. And that night, as Londoners went to bed, there was still no end in sight.
While most people had been able to hunker down in their homes over the weekend, millions knew that that morning they were going to have to head out to work again into that thick, yellow murk. And the fourth day of the smog would bring new horrors.
Monday, the 8th of December, London's fourth day of smog. Within 24 hours, it would finally be lifting, but for Londoners, there was worse yet to come. The government had not issued a stay-at-home warning, so it was back to work for millions. Working from home wasn't an option in the 1950s.
Office and factory workers set out into the gloom, while above their heads, chimneys pumped out yet more pollution into the stagnant air. The bus network was almost completely shut down, so people either had to join queues outside tube stations that were already packed to capacity, or they had to walk. Many of those workers were wearing face masks, believing they'd offer some protection from the smog. Did they actually work?
In 1952, no one had tested if masks or face coverings were effective against pollutants in smog. So I've recruited Dr. David Green from the London Air Quality Network to test them using his high-tech equipment.
So this whole bit of apparatus looks amazing. Does he have a name?
His name is Morse.
Really?
We name all of our equipment after detectives.
Because you're air pollution detectives?
Indeed.
So can you talk me through it? Like, what's going on in the box?
Well, we're pumping fake smog in that's made up of particles, which are about the same size as you would have seen during the smogs, and we're pumping in gas as well to simulate the sulfur dioxide.
So you can look at whether the masks stopped smoke and whether they stopped sulfur dioxide.
Yep.
What were the results?
The total number of particles, you can see there's a big drop. That's about 80% reduction.
Wow. I thought it wouldn't work at all, basically. So effectively, the mask would have reduced the amount of smoke getting into your lungs by about 80%?
Yes.
But smoke isn't the most toxic thing in smog.
What about the gas sulfur dioxide?
From this test, it did a great deal. It only reduced it by about 5%.
So you've still got that very high level of sulfur dioxide.
David repeated the test on a homemade mask and discovered it didn't stop much smoke or any sulfur dioxide.
This is amazing data from you and Morse.
Yeah, well, they didn't have any of this equipment in the 50s, so they never really knew how effective the masks were.
So really, for the first time, we're discovering whether you put a scarf over your face or you're wearing a homemade mask or you're wearing the official one, no one in London has any protection from the sulfur dioxide.
Yes.
After nearly 4 days without a breath of wind, by Monday lunchtime a gentle breeze had started to blow and the smog thinned a little. It was the first glimmer of hope. But it was little comfort to the exhausted medics in London's hospitals, where the crisis now reached its peak. One doctor, Donald Aitchison, described the smog still swirling into his wards, coating everything with a grime that had to be constantly cleaned off. All non-emergency procedures were cancelled, and in desperation, male respiratory patients were put onto maternity wards. But despite this, 124 patients in London still couldn't be found a bed anywhere. Like many, Carol Beasley's father, who suffered from bronchitis, had stayed at home. He'd fallen ill on the second day of the smog. But GPs were also overwhelmed, and so far, he'd received little help.
My father was getting more and more delirious. My mother was frantic. I just happened to look out the window and I saw Dr. Winder's car, and I said, "Mum, the doctor's here." And he pulled out one of those old-fashioned oxygen cylinders, lugged it up 3 flights of stairs, plugged it into the bedroom, and had a mask put over my father's face. And it saved his life, because gradually you could hear the gasping and the coughing stopping, and gradually he recovered.
Carol's father was one of the lucky ones. Jean Ponder was a 17-year-old trainee nurse and had just started on the wards when the smog hit. By the 4th day, the senior nurses didn't have time to deal with all the dead. So this traumatic job fell to Jean, who had to wash and prepare the bodies ready for the mortuary. Others also now became aware an unprecedented catastrophe was unfolding, long before the government did. That Monday, undertakers were inundated with calls from bereaved families whose loved ones had died over the weekend. John Harris, of undertakers T. Cribb and Sons, has found records from the time.
These are our ledgers for 52, which give an indication to what was happening during the smog. We may sometimes have only done perhaps 1 funeral in a week. When you look to here, each one of these pages represents 4 deaths. You know, you're going through 3 days here where there's 12 deaths.
Were they surprised by it?
Oh yeah, it was a dawning moment for him when he went to the London hospital, and suddenly you go through a corridor, and where the mortuary was full, there are bodies laying on trolleys in the hallways.
Wow.
So many bodies were being collected that hearses had to be removed from the garage so it could be turned into a makeshift mortuary.
You have to remember, they had to make all their own coffins, So during the day, the funerals would have happened, but of a night, it would have been sort of all hands to the pump in the workshops, making the coffins.
The picture you're painting is of overwhelming working hours and extremely difficult working conditions. Doctors, nurses and undertakers could see the deadly catastrophe unfolding all around them, but there was still no response from the government.
By Monday evening, the slight breeze had thinned the smog enough to encourage the Sadler's Wells Theatre to go ahead with their performance of the opera La Traviata.
In 1952, the theatre looked like this. It's been almost entirely rebuilt since then. 1,350 people managed to make their way through the smog to watch the performance.
The famous opera singer Marjorie Shires was playing the lead.
Smog had actually seeped into the theatre, and it was so thick it burned Marjorie Shires' throat. She was terrified she'd permanently damage her voice if she continued the performance. Meanwhile, visibility had grown so low inside the theatre, the conductor could only see the front rank of the orchestra, and the audience couldn't even see the stage. So at the end of the first act, the opera was abandoned, and everyone had to make their way out of the theatre and home through the smog.
While for those opera-goers, the smog continued to be a frustration, for hundreds of families across London, it had been another day of tragedy. It was the most lethal so far. 600 more people had been killed. In just 4 days, the smog had taken almost 1,600 lives. But did that slight breeze signal the end could finally be in sight?
I've come to the Met Office HQ in Exeter to find out. Deep in their archive, I'm meeting Catherine Ross. We've dug out the original weather records from December 1952.
So this is a pressure chart for the British Isles for 8 p.m. on Monday the 8th of December, the last day of the Great Smog.
So this is the high pressure that was just pushing the smog over London and trapping it in.
Yeah.
And these isobars, they're very closely bunched up together, aren't they? What does that mean?
So the closer the isobars, the stronger the wind. So this just shows the wind starting to pick up. We've moved away from that dead calm in the centre of the high pressure, and we can see that in the register for Tuesday morning. First thing in the morning, we've got no wind, and you can also see the visibility is very low.
What does X2 mean?
So X2 means that you've got visibility of less than 40 yards. So very little visibility at all. And then as we move through the morning, suddenly the wind starts to pick up and the visibility picks up with it as everything just blows away and that high pressure shifts off towards the continent.
So the high pressure's moved away, effectively lifting the lid off and allowing the smog to dissipate.
Absolutely. The wind's just allowing everything to escape.
I mean, it's quite incredible, isn't it? Within a few hours, the smog just disappears. Must have been sweet relief for those people.
Must have been amazing for them, yeah.
It seemed almost like a miracle. By 10 a.m. on the Tuesday, the smog had lifted across much of London. With the lid of high pressure removed, the smoke from the millions of fireplaces still blazing across the city could now rise up and be blown away on the growing wind.
That was absolutely lovely when it lifted, because it went quite quickly. It was gorgeous. We took off our masks and said, well, that's that. Yes, it was all a great relief when it was gone.
I can remember looking out of the window and seeing the sun, which we hadn't seen for nearly a week. And my father, by that time, was sitting up in bed and he was getting better.
Here on the River Thames, an extraordinary sight could be seen. After being closed for days, the Port of London was finally reopened. And as far as the eye could see, ships of all shapes and sizes were filling the river, sailing four abreast, heading outwards towards the sea. Normal life was being breathed back into the city. The smog may finally have cleared, but the horror was far from over. People continued to die in huge numbers. The death toll was spiraling. And only recently has the shocking true figure been revealed.
10 days after the smog, normal life had resumed for most Londoners. Typical dreary weather had returned as they made the final preparations for Christmas. But in London's hospitals, it was far from normal. There was still a bed shortage, and people who'd been made ill by the smog continued to die. The medics knew something terrible had occurred, and rumours began to swirl of a massive death toll. As the mortality figures had been collated, it finally dawned on the government that London had suffered a disaster on an unprecedented scale. And now the truth was finally revealed.
On the 18th of December, just over there in the House of Commons, the Health Minister, Ian MacLeod, was asked by a concerned MP how many people were known to have died during the recent smog. Well, the Commons was stunned when MacLeod revealed that in 1 week the smog had killed over 2,800 people. It caused shock and outrage.
But that astonishing figure only included people who died in the actual week of the Great Smog. Many suffered such severe lung damage they'd never recover. To investigate how long after the smog cleared people continued to die, I've come to Mortlake Crematorium in West London.
And it was here that hundreds of the victims of the Great Smog were cremated.
They keep records of all cremations carried out here since they opened in 1939.
What I'm looking for is, of course, the year of the Great Smog, that December, but as well as that, the months afterwards and the year before for comparison.
I'm going to add up all the cremations that took place here in December 1952 when the Great Smog struck in order to compare the figure to the previous normal year.
Now, in 1952, there are 324 cremations. In 1951, there are 212. So that's a 53% increase in cremations that December. What's so shocking to me, looking at these pages, is the ages of death. Life expectancy in 1952 is 69. But we see over and over and over again, 41 years, 59 years old, 60 years old, 58 years old. These are lives cut short by decades because of the smog. There's a child here at 1 year and 10 months. I mean, it's appalling to think that death might well be related to the Great Killer Smog.
But the increased number of cremations here doesn't end in December 1952. It continues into the following year.
And here's what's really astonishing. In January, there's still a 23% increase in cremations at this crematorium. In February, it's still up at 12%. In March, it's at 13% above the year before. Only in April is it down at a 3% increase. Now, all those excess deaths are caused by the Great Killer Smog. These are people who would have been severely affected at the time, but the smog, the chemicals in the air, have damaged many parts of their bodies, their brains, their hearts, their kidneys, their lungs, and all of that has led to early deaths and excess deaths in the months that follow.
This pattern of increased deaths in the months after the smog is repeated in cemeteries and crematoria across London.
In the spring of 1953, Churchill's government was refusing to attribute those excess deaths to the smog. They only counted deaths that occurred during the week of the smog itself and the following week. Now, that official government figure was horrific enough, 4,000 deaths in just 2 weeks. But what it didn't include was the huge number of premature deaths that occurred for months after the event itself due to chemical damage to people's lungs and bodies.
Despite these terrible consequences, the government initially took no action. But public outrage was so great that 7 months later they agreed to commission an inquiry. The interim report, published in December 1953, was damning.
One section removed by the government from the final report revealed that although there were 4,000 excess deaths in the 2 weeks around the smog, there were 8,000 excess deaths over the next 10 weeks.
The government said those 8,000 extra deaths were due to a flu outbreak, not smog.
Research now shows that there was no such outbreak, and only a tiny fraction of the deaths following the Great Smog in the months afterwards were flu-related. This means that the official 4,000 deaths, in fact, is wrong, and that the total death toll from the Great Smog is 12,000 people.
That's 3 times the government's official death toll. Other research has also now revealed more than 100,000 Londoners were made seriously ill by the smog, many suffering long-term consequences.
After the smog, I went to a lecture about the atom bomb, and I came over feeling ill. So I made my excuses and went home, went to bed. Doctor was called. Took one look at me, said, pneumonia. No doubt the pneumonia was caused by being in the fog and the smoke. So she gave me penicillin injections and left me to it in bed. The first night I woke up and I was in pain, and we had to call the doctor out during the night, and he gave me another injection. And after that, I gradually recovered, although it affected me physically, for a long, long time after that.
Others chose to leave London for cleaner air.
We left London when I was about 10 or 11. My health was a lot better for not living in London, because all the while I lived there, I was always ill with something.
The damning inquiry into the Great Smog forced the government to take action, and in 1956 the Clean Air Act was passed. It introduced smokeless zones in London and other industrial cities. It finally brought an end to coal smogs in Britain.
But while smog may be a thing of the past in modern Britain, air pollution certainly isn't.
Today, testing sites like this one on the Euston Road in London do record worrying levels of pollution, but mostly from invisible car fumes. And these dangerous gases can still be trapped by the same high-pressure weather conditions that resulted in the Great Smog 70 years ago.
In fact, in January 2022, Alert Level 10 was issued in London. That's the highest warning level for air pollution. Vulnerable people were asked to stay indoors.
And while much less coal is burned in Britain today, globally twice as much is burned as there was in the 1950s. Worldwide, coal smoke still causes hundreds of thousands of premature deaths every year.
The story of killer smog is far from over.